scripture reading this morning comes from Genesis chapter 3, verses 14 and 15. God spoke to the serpent, "What you have done carries great consequences. Now you are cursed more than cattle or wild beasts. You will writhe on your belly forever, consuming the dust out of which man was made. I will make you and your brood enemies of the woman and all her children. The woman's child will stomp your head, and you will strike his heel." Also, 2 Samuel chapter 7, 11 to 14. The Eternal One spoke to David, "More importantly, I, the Eternal, swear to you that I will raise up a dynasty from you in your family. When you come to the end of your days and you leave this life to lie down with your fathers, I will rise up from you a descendant, your own flesh and blood, and I will make his kingdom and family sure. He will be the one to build a temple honoring my name, and I will establish the leadership of his kingdom for all time. I will be to him a father, and he will be to me a son."
And now Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 16, which is the genealogy of Jesus. And rather than me read it, I thought we'd do something a little different.
Abraham had Isaac, he had Jacob, he had Judah and his kin. Then Perez and Zerah came from Judah's woman Tamar. Perez, he brought Hezron up, and then came Aram and Amminadab and Nahshon, who was then the dad of Salmon, with Rahab father Boaz. Ruth, she married Boaz, who had Obed, who had Jesse. Jesse, he had David, who we know as king. David, he had Solomon by dead Uriah's wife. Solomon, well, you won't, he had good old Rehoboam, followed by Abijah, who had Asa. Asa had Jehoshaphat, had Joram, had Uzziah, who had Jotham, then Ahaz, and Hezekiah. Followed by Manasseh, who had Amon, who was Amen, who was father of a good boy named Josiah. Who grandfather Jehoiakim, who caused the Babylonian captivity, because he was Uriah. Then he had Shealtiel, who begat Zerubbabel, who had Abiud, who had Eliakim. Eliakim had Azar, who had Zadok, father of Eliakim. He had Eliezer, who had Nathan, who had Jacob. Listen very closely, I don't want to sing this twice. Jacob was the father of Joseph, husband of Mary, mother of Christ.
I hope you all are paying attention. Just in case you're wondering, that song was done by a man named Andrew Peterson. Today, we have a ton to cover, a lot to cover. We're very busy. And so we're going to talk first about genealogies. We're going to be in chapter 22 of the story, if you have a copy of that, or we're going to be in Matthew chapter 1-ish. And so if you have a Bible, you can be in chapter 1 of Matthew-ish. So it starts off with genealogies. I know it's everybody's favorite topic is genealogies, right? And I just didn't want to say all the names, so I made Andrew do it. Yeah, it's one of those things where we read all of these names and we kind of glaze over, okay, let's just get to the Christmas story. But hopefully, either reading through the names in Matthew 1 or in Luke 3, if you want the other side of Jesus' family, or listening to that song, some of those names stand out a little bit for you, hopefully. It starts off with Abraham. Father Abraham had many sons had Father Abraham. We remember Abraham, don't we? Abraham was sent out by God into the wilderness. Leave your father's household. I will make you a blessing. You will have descendants as numerous as the stars. That seems like forever ago in a good old book called Genesis. And then we hear about Abraham's kids, which took him a while to have, by the way. He had Isaac, and then Isaac had Jacob. You remember Jacob and Esau. They didn't get along real well. Esau came in. He was the oldest. He was hungry, and he ended up giving away his birthright as the firstborn for a bowl of soup. You remember this. And then Jacob ended up tricking good old dad, Isaac, into thinking that he was Esau and therefore blessing him. And then there's some other names that are passed on through there. We have Judah, who is one of the big 12. You remember Jacob had several boys, one of which was named Joseph, if you remember that, the bobblehead thing. Yeah, okay. Joseph had coat of many colors. And his older brother, who was actually third in line, but kind of took over, was named Judah. And we know that each one of those brothers would actually be the father of a tribe of Israel. Judah would end up being the largest. Now Judah actually, what's a nice way to put this, molested his sister Tamar. I didn't know, I thought she was a prostitute. She got pregnant. And then they had a son. And so on and so forth. And then that son ends up getting married to a woman named Rahab. You might remember Rahab was a Gentile. She was a foreigner. She was a prostitute living in a town called Jericho. Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, right? And the walls came tumbling down. Well, Rahab was the one who was faithful. She hid all the spies and sent them back home and said, you know what, just I want to be good to God. And they said, well, God will be good to you. And so she got worked into Jesus' genealogy. And then you have others like Boaz, who ends up marrying a woman named Ruth. If you remember that story, you the bobblehead thing, right? Ruth is this kind of faithful daughter-in-law to Naomi. She ends up marrying this man named Boaz, who is known as a kinsman redeemer, and he ends up basically giving back the life to Naomi and to Ruth and to all of them, really. Then you have Jesse, who is best known as David's dad, right? David, good King David, right? He fought with Goliath, and he ran from Saul, and he did all sorts of stuff, and he ended up actually committing adultery with a woman named Bathsheba, who's not even named in Matthew's genealogy. She's just known as Uriah's wife, which is kind of funny. And then there's their son Solomon. You might remember Solomon was the wise man. He built this glorious, grand temple all to God. He was a very incredibly wise man. He could have asked for money or long life or victory over his foes. But instead, Solomon asked for wisdom from God. God gave it to him. And he gave him all the wisdom and all the victories and all of this stuff. He was a great king, but he had several wives, which helped create some cracks in the nation, you might remember. His son was Rehoboam. Rehoboam was one of those guys that helped split things up. And Rehoboam actually...
No?
Okay. Genesis 12, 1-3. God told Abraham, leave your country, your family, and your father's home, for a land that I will show you. I'll make you a great nation and bless you. I'll make you famous. You'll be a blessing. I'll bless those who bless you. Those who curse you, I'll curse. All the families of the earth will be blessed through you.
Okay. Thank you for that. We said we're very busy. We have things to do. We don't have time for that. So, moving on. So that's kind of the upper story, right? That's what we've been following. That's what God has been doing all along these last several months, right? You can kind of pick out these key characters that we've been looking at. And it seems like God has a plan, a direction that He's headed. But the real question here is, if you have a Bible near you, in front of you, at home, in your mind, whatever, and you go all the way to the end of Malachi, which is the last book of the Old Testament. I apologize we didn't get there last week. We had a lot to cover, but Malachi is the last book of the Old Testament. And Malachi essentially says, look guys, everything is going well, the walls are rebuilt, the temple's rebuilt, we had this exile, but we're all better now. But just be aware, be careful that you don't get things, mixed up. Make sure that you're being faithful to God and that you know what's important. And if you turn from Malachi to Matthew, that means we're in the New Testament. Can everybody say amen?
Amen.
Yeah, the New Testament. But in a lot of your Bibles, right, if you turn from Malachi to Matthew, there's a blank page. And if you're not aware, if you're just reading through the Bible for the first time and you go straight from Malachi to Matthew, you might be tempted to think that Malachi and Matthew lived at the same time. That there's not much that occurred between Malachi and Matthew. And in reality, there's about 400 years that passed between Malachi and Matthew. Everybody say 400?
400.
That's a long time. Just to give you an idea how long a time it is and how much things can change in that period of time, this year is 2014. Can anybody tell me what happened in this country in 1614? No? Oh, that's because there wasn't a this country in 1614. Yeah. There were some Native Americans here, there were maybe some Viking visits, and occasionally a European ship would stop by. But for the most part, there was no organized nation here. It wasn't, no colonies, no states, no democracy, no nothing. Right? And imagine what life was like in 1614 as compared to today. I mean, you think about how much life has changed just in the last 30 years, let alone the last 400. And so things change very rapidly. So what I want to do is I want to try and help bridge the gap a little bit, okay? So that it's not such a big jump, so that you know how we got to this point, okay? Is everybody cool with that? A little history lesson? Okay? I don't have a big stick to smack the thing with, but you'll just have to follow along, okay? So, we know that the Israelites were actually enslaved, captive, by a group known as Babylon, right? Now, the Babylonians, they were then captured by a group known as Persia, or the Persians. And that's where we left things off. The Persians were in control, right? They had control of everything. Some of the Israelites were in exile. Some of them had gone back to Jerusalem. You remember this? Well, Persia was then conquered by a nation known as Greece, by a young upstart general that nobody took seriously named Alexander. He became known as Alexander the Great. And he and his few little boats conquered everything. The entire world, from India west, essentially, was all Greek control. Now, with that Greek control came Greek influence. And that meant that everybody spoke Greek. That was one thing. Make sure the language is common. And so everybody in the Greek territory spoke Greek. Now, this is a big deal. I know some of you are looking like, who cares? But it's a big deal, okay? Because everybody spoke one language. We have a hard enough time in our country with that, okay? This is several countries over a huge span of land, all sharing a common language. And during this time, people decided, you know what? Since everybody's going to speak Greek, we need to make sure all the big literature is written in Greek as well. So the Old Testament, which was just kind of sort of coming together at this point, they decided we're going to make a Greek copy of that. That's known as the Septuagint. And so everybody, all the rabbis, began to have copies, Greek copies of the Old Testament, which is huge. Now, as time continued on, other things began to seep their way into the culture. Music, medicine, math, government, philosophy, everything was Greek-oriented. Okay? Yogurt. Now, Alexander died. Okay? Alexander died. And usually when you have one leader who's in charge of everything, and he dies, there's usually a struggle, right? Because then everybody wants the same piece of pie that he had. And so two of his generals, named Ptolemy and Seleucid, there's not going to be a quiz, don't worry. Those two generals began to fight and argue and war against each other to have the biggest chunk of land that they could. So they began to fight. Now meanwhile, while all this is going on, all the Greek control, the wars, all this stuff, the Jews, that's a good thing. The Jews are kind of caught in the middle. They're kind of just stuck. And so they began to hop from bandwagon to bandwagon. Ptolemy's side is winning. Yes, we are Ptolemy supporters. Seleucid side begins to win. Yes, we are pro-Seleucid, right? And they would begin to bribe certain groups known as Sadducees, would begin to bribe whoever was in charge so that they could have a higher position in the temple. Higher position in the temple meant more pay, more luxury, more authority. Everybody still with me? Okay. I know we started off with genealogy. Now we're in history. It's not even written in the book. You guys are like, man, I should have stayed in bed. So in 175 BC, 175 years before the birth of Christ, roughly, a guy by the name of Antiochus IV, who is a Seleucid general, he walks into the temple of Jerusalem. Now you guys have been following along in the Old Testament. You know how big a deal this temple is. He goes into the temple and he demands that the Jews build an altar there. Now again, that's not that big of a deal. An altar in the temple, that makes sense. He builds this altar and he demands that they sacrifice pigs to Zeus. Some people just don't like that. Foreign god in Yahweh's temple, and we're sacrificing unclean animals, that's just wrong. That's not going to work. And so a group known as the Maccabees, whoa. Oh, we're turning up the volume. Okay. Maccabees, they revolt. A group of Jews revolt. And they actually gain independence for Jerusalem. Now, during this time, as I said, there are several groups that rise up. One group is known as the Sadducees. Everybody say Sadducees.
Sadducees.
And they were sad, you see, because they don't believe in the resurrection. That joke is not original with me. They don't believe in the resurrection. They don't believe in any supernatural part of the Old Testament or the Scriptures. Nor do they believe in any kind of commentary on the Scriptures. They are only they only follow the Torah, the first 5 books. They follow those very strictly, okay? And they are all about the temple, the position in the temple, their place in the temple, because temple authority equals authority in society. And so their kind of slogan, which I improvised, is don't rock the boat, we've got a good thing here. Right? Don't cause any instability because we don't want to lose our place in society. Another group that was formed was known as the Pharisees. Everybody say Pharisees?
Pharisees.
Pharisees. And the Pharisees were law followers without compromise. They weren't priests. They were like the straight-A students of Jews, right? They would follow every law, every rule, everything about everything, okay? Now, for instance, they knew that, okay, we're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. And so they would actually follow the laws that you're only allowed to walk so long of a distance during the Sabbath, so many steps, okay? They would, okay, we're supposed to tithe. We know we're supposed to tithe, that's important. They would tithe their herbs like mint and other spices.
Chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, 14. The Word was first, the Word present to God, God present to the Word. The Word was God, in readiness for God from day one. Everything was created through Him. Nothing, not one thing, came into being without Him. What came into existence was life, and the life was light to live by. The light blazed out of the darkness. The darkness couldn't put it out. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. We saw the glory with our own eyes, the one-of-a-kind glory, like Father, like Son, generous inside and out, true from start to finish.
But I kind of expected interruptions from teenagers, but you're the moderator. So we're going to continue forward. I'm just going to pretend like I didn't hear that because we're very busy and we have a lot of stuff to accomplish. So the Pharisees were all about the law, following the rules. And they believed that the only way to be righteous, the only way to get to heaven, is to earn it. Right? You have so many hoops to jump through, so many boxes to check, you got to make sure you get it all covered. And so that's the Pharisees. And then, in 70 BC, 70 years before the birth of Christ, 2 descendants of the Maccabees, 2 descendants of this original group that revolted, 2 men who were part of this Jewish uprising, they start to fight, because that's what people do. They fight over control, over land, over property, over power. They begin this war, and one of them decides that he needs some help. He needs some allies in this war, and so he asks for help from Rome. And Rome says, okay. They come in, and they take over everything. And the funny thing about this is the Romans take over, and they don't want any riots. They want everybody to just get along. Just recognize that we're in control, and you're not, and that's how it is. And so the Romans established what was known as Pax Romana. Pax Romana. This is known as the Roman peace. Roman peace. Essentially what it is, it sounds very nice, doesn't it? I mean, it sounds pretty fluffy. But the Roman peace, Pax Romana, essentially what this was they would say, look, Brent, we will give you protection. We will give you citizenship. We will give you all the rights and privileges of being a Roman citizen, as long as you do two things. First off, as long as you pay taxes, because everybody wants their money. And two, don't be starting nothing. Okay? Behave yourself. Don't start any revolutions. Don't start any riots. Don't try and start anything, and make sure we get our money. And that's where we're at in Matthew. See, the world changes drastically from one period to the next. Who's in control? What language do they speak? You know, I told you that Greek was the common language of the day. That's why the New Testament originally is written in Greek. And not just any Greek, it's written in common Greek, street Greek, if you will. Rome has this influence, this mighty army. Rome was the largest empire in our history of our planet. And they took over everything. And they did this through fear. They planted soldiers and centurions, guys with pointy sticks, all over the place to make sure that the people didn't riot, to make sure that the people didn't get out of control, to make sure that the people didn't do anything really, really upsetting. They didn't want anybody to rock the boat, right? Don't do anything to interrupt. And so the people got upset about this, as you can imagine. Last week, if you were here, last week, we ended with people coming and asking the priest, read aloud the text. Oh, we're going to do this. Oh, we're going to celebrate this forgotten feast. And we're going to rebuild the wall. And we're going to change things. And we're going to be flexible. And we're going to do all of these things. And we're going to stay on the right track. But as people do, right, we drift gradually, sometimes quickly. And so the people drastically change. And they find themselves enslaved again and again and again and again. With the Babylonians, with the Persians, with the Greeks, and even with the Maccabees. Because even though they were Jewish, they still had their own idea of how things should be run. And it didn't necessarily match up with God's Word. Now, I know I've spent a lot of time talking about things that aren't in the Bible today, and I hope that's okay. But I think it's incredible exactly where we came from and where we're going, how we make that connection. Now, if you were curious about where to find this information, there were books that were written called the Apocrypha, which...
Luke, verse 2, 4 through 7. Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house of and family of David, in order to register along with Mary, who was engaged to him and was with child. While they were there, the days were completed for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and she wrapped him in clothes and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn.
And then God interrupted human history. But most people were too busy to notice. They had their plan, their idea of what God was going to do. They wanted a political Messiah, a warrior king. They wanted this glorious champion who would come out swinging and knock all the foes to their behinds. But instead, they got a baby. Now, Some people heard about a baby born in a manger in a small town. They traveled great distance through great struggle and sacrifice of their own to get there to see this baby, but most people ignored it. They were too busy. The people were expecting a king, and instead they got a cradle. Some people this morning probably thought to themselves, man, PT is being awfully rude to those people. Maybe, just maybe, God is trying to interrupt our lives. And we blow him off. We dismiss him. We ignore him. We angrily rebuke him and say, God, I don't have time for that. I don't have money for that. I don't have energy for that. I don't have for that. And we say, later. I'm too busy. And so the question is, are we too busy for a baby? I was reading a book by Pastor Kyle Idleman, and he's telling a story about a congregant, a parish member, who wrote a letter to the church saying that he no longer wanted to be a part of the congregation. And when he was asked for the reason why he didn't want to be a part of the congregation anymore, he said, well, I don't like Kyle's sermons. Okay? And so Kyle called the guy and said, hey, I heard you don't like my sermons. Well, there was an awkward silence, as you can imagine. And after he stumbled around a little bit, trying to come up with his reason, he said, well, I feel like when you talk about all this stuff with Jesus and all this stuff, I feel like you're trying to interfere with my life. Yep. See, here's the thing. If you don't notice the baby, you'll miss him. If you don't embrace those interruptions of the Messiah in your life, maybe somebody new moves in and they're a little strange. They move in next to you. Maybe God is saying, hey, get out of the lawn chair and go talk to them. Ask them about my son. Maybe you hear about something, somebody asks for money. People are always asking for money, aren't they? People always ask for money. And maybe you hear about something, somebody asks for money, and we get so used to saying no, we don't realize that we're missing the interruption that God has planned for our lives. Don't ignore God's interruptions. Don't ignore Emmanuel. Don't ignore God with us. Remember, that's the whole purpose of this whole thing. That's the reason for not just the season, but for life. That's why it all happened, is so that God could be with us from the beginning of time until today and forevermore. The reason why God created us, the reason why He loves us, is because He constantly, forever, wants to be with us. And in the person of Jesus Christ, it happened. Suddenly, this Creator God who was separate, sometimes not even mentioned, silent for 400 years, this God who somehow he's here and He's there, and He's visible but invisible, and it's really, it's beyond understanding. Somehow this God took on flesh and came here for us. Don't ignore God's interruptions in your life. Embrace them. Let's pray. Father, we have this idea of how things should go. From A to Z. We've got it all mapped out. It's been called all sorts of things. The American dream, our 5-year plan. We've got it all laid out nice and neat. Sometimes we get so complacent, so comfortable in the way things are, and the oppression that we face, and in the struggles that we go through, that we miss when you interrupt and interfere in our lives. Or if we don't miss it, God, we angrily yell at you. We say, God, I don't have time for that. I'm not going to give money to that. I'm not going to help with that. I'm not going to dedicate my time and my efforts and my energy. I'm not going to give anything to that because it doesn't fit the plan. It doesn't fit our plan. Father, just like the Israelites, we know that our plan is full of holes, full of flaws. The only plan that carries on without a hitch, the only plan that will work successfully to its end is your plan. Father, help us to embrace interruptions rather than to rebuke them, to ignore them, or to avoid them. We thank you for the best interruption ever, your Son, Jesus Christ. And it's in His name that we pray. Amen. Now, that was kind of a downer sermon, wasn't it? It was a little pointed. I got kind of angry there at parts, and I hate to leave us like that. Especially when it's such good news. I mean, the word gospel literally means good news. Jesus is here. And so I want to end us on a much peppier note than what we would have normally ended with. And so this is a celebration of Jesus. This is a celebration of Emmanuel, which means God with us. So as you're just being dismissed, and you will be dismissed as soon as I stop yakking, there's going to be a song playing, and it's peppy, and it's fun, and so I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you.